The morning sun filtered through the small windows of the coffee shop, casting a soft glow on the rustic wooden tables. The cozy scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mixing with the sound of quiet chatter and the gentle hum of the espresso machine. The shop was calm, just as it always was at this hour. No rush, no hurry. A few regulars sat by the window, sipping their drinks, lost in their own worlds, while the barista worked behind the counter with a smile, greeting everyone who walked in. The bell above the door jingled softly, and the entrance was marked by the steady shuffle of boots on the wooden floor. A man entered, his weathered face and posture telling stories of years gone by. His uniform, though worn and faded, still carried an undeniable weight, military patches from a time long past. He was tall, but his shoulders slumped with the exhaustion of old battles, both seen and unseen. The air around him seemed quieter, as if the room was aware of the presence of someone who had lived through more than most could ever imagine. The barista looked up from the counter and offered a warm, genuine smile. "Good morning, sir. What can I get for you today?" He paused for a moment, his tired eyes scanning the menu above. "Just a coffee," he said in a gravelly voice, placing his order with simple words but a quiet intensity. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a handful of change and began to count it out carefully. The barista noticed his hands trembling slightly, but said nothing. Instead, she gave him another smile, as if nothing were amiss. Standing in line, a young woman in her mid-20s shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her eyes flickering between her phone and the barista behind the counter. It was just another morning routine, her usual coffee before work, a moment of peace before the chaos of the day began. But today, something was different. She noticed the man in front of her, his presence distinct amidst the hum of the quiet shop. He was tall, his frame broad but slumped, as if the weight of the years had pressed down on him in ways she couldn't quite explain. His uniform, old and frayed at the edges, spoke of a time far behind. It was clear he had lived a life that most could only imagine, though the wariness in his posture told a different story than any uniform could. Her gaze drifted to the faded medals pinned on his jacket, the slight tremble of his hands as he counted out the change. There was a quiet sadness about him, an energy that seemed to settle in the air around him. His eyes, distant and heavy, seemed to carry a story he hadn't shared with anyone in years. She wondered what that story was, what he had seen, what he had lost. Her heart tugged at the mystery of it all, and she couldn't look away. It was strange, the way he made her feel. A deep curiosity stirred inside her, but it was more than that. It was an unease, a sensation she couldn't quite place. She felt as if something had shifted in the room, like the air had thickened with the weight of his unspoken words. She found herself wondering why someone so quiet, so worn, would even step out into the world on a morning like this. She shifted uncomfortably, her eyes returning to him. Why was she so drawn to him? She couldn't explain it. All she knew was that she wanted to understand him. The veteran reached into his coat pocket with a slow, deliberate motion. His fingers fumbled slightly as he pulled out a worn wallet, the edges frayed from years of use. He opened it with a quiet sigh, scanning the few crumpled bills inside. His hands shook ever so slightly as he searched for the right amount to cover the cost of the coffee, but it was clear he wasn't finding it. The soft clink of coins in his hand, as he counted them one by one, echoed in the quiet shop. A tension hung in the air, and the young woman could feel it tighten around her chest. She watched, her heart tightening with each passing moment. Something wasn't right. The veteran seemed to be struggling, not just with the coins but with something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface. His brow furrowed, his eyes flickering with frustration, and she could see the way his shoulders tensed in embarrassment. "I'm sorry," he murmured softly, more to himself than to the barista. I don't think I have enough." The barista, a young woman with kind eyes, offered a gentle smile, though her expression softened in concern. "It's okay, sir," she said, her voice calm and understanding. "I can cover it for you. No need to worry." The veteran's head snapped up at her words, his eyes wide with a mix of surprise and something else, perhaps pride, perhaps shame. He shook his head, his hand trembling as he closed his wallet with a quiet snap. "No," he said, his voice low and filled with quiet resistance. I can't take charity. I'll figure it out. I don't need anyone's help." There was a pause, a heavy silence between them. The barista's face softened with empathy, but the veteran's expression remained firm, though his eyes held a depth of vulnerability that was hard to ignore. He stood there for a moment, unsure, caught between his pride and his need. The young woman, still standing behind him, felt her chest tighten. She wanted to help, to say something, but she didn't know what words would ease the pain that seemed to weigh down on him. His refusal hung in the air, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was so much more to this moment than just a simple transaction. The young woman stood there, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't stand it anymore, the discomfort, the quiet struggle that the veteran was going through. Something inside her stirred, pushing her to do something, anything, to help him. Without fully thinking, she stepped forward, her voice breaking the silence that had settled over the coffee shop. "I'll pay for it," she said, her words clear and calm, though her hands were shaking slightly. "It's not a big deal. Please, let me." The veteran turned to look at her, his expression one of surprise, as though he hadn't expected anyone to offer. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to slow down. He blinked, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. His lips parted, but no words came out. The barista, equally stunned, stood frozen for a moment before offering the faintest of smiles, her eyes flicking between the two of them. She could tell the offer had caught the veteran off guard, but the young woman's sincerity was undeniable. The veteran's gaze softened, though his face remained clouded with hesitation. I can't ask you to do that," he mumbled, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry, I can't take your money." But there was something in his eyes now, a flicker of hope, mixed with disbelief. He seemed torn, caught between his pride and his need. The weight of his refusal hung in the air, but the young woman held her ground. She couldn't understand why it mattered so much to her, but she felt like she had to do this. "It's okay," she said, her voice gentler this time. "You don't have to explain. Just let me do this for you." The veteran stood there for a long moment, his eyes flickering between her and the barista, as though trying to reconcile the offer with the stubborn pride that had shaped him over the years. The tremor in his hands was more noticeable now, the weight of his years pressing down on him with every passing second. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded, though his eyes remained uncertain. "All right," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." The young woman smiled at him, the tension between them easing just a little, though the quiet sadness in his eyes lingered. She paid for the coffee, feeling the weight of the moment, even though it seemed so small. But somehow, it wasn't small at all. The veteran took his coffee with a quiet nod of gratitude and slowly made his way to a corner table near the window. His movements were deliberate, careful, as if the weight of the world still sat heavy on his shoulders. The young woman, unable to shake the feeling that there was something more to this moment, found herself glancing over at him. She could have sat anywhere in the coffee shop, but for reasons she couldn't fully understand, she felt drawn to the table near him. Without thinking, she grabbed her drink and walked toward the empty chair across from his. She didn't speak, didn't ask if it was okay, but as she sat down, a small part of her felt a strange sense of peace. The air between them felt quiet, but full of meaning. There was no need for words, just the sound of soft sips and the occasional creak of the wooden chairs beneath them. From across the table, she couldn't help but study him a little more closely. His hands, rough and scarred, rested on the table, the skin worn like old leather. It wasn't just the years that had aged him, but something deeper, something that spoke of battles fought long after the wars had ended. The old scars on his hands, the kind that didn't fade with time, seemed to tell stories of pain and survival, of moments he had never shared with anyone. Her eyes drifted up to the faded medals on his jacket, each one a symbol of a past she could only imagine. They had once shone with pride, but now, they too had dulled with the passage of time. The ribbons, barely visible under the wear of years, seemed to whisper of sacrifices made and battles lost. The silence between them wasn't awkward, but comfortable in its own way. There was something in the air, an unspoken understanding that neither of them could fully explain. She wasn't sure what drew her to him, the sorrow in his eyes, the quiet strength in his posture, or the quiet ache that seemed to hang around him. It didn't matter. In this small, quiet space, they were connected by something deeper than words, a bond that neither of them had asked for, but both understood, even without saying a single thing. As the young woman stirred her coffee, preparing to leave, she stole one last glance at the veteran sitting quietly across from her. She hadn't meant to stare, but there was something about him, something that lingered in the air around him. For a moment, her eyes met his, and she was caught off guard by what she saw. His weathered face, usually so reserved, had softened, and she could see the faint shimmer of tears in his tired eyes. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The room seemed to grow quieter, as if the whole world had paused, just for them. The veteran didn't look away, and neither did she. She felt an odd mix of vulnerability and empathy wash over her as she realized he wasn't just staring at her. He was looking at her as though he had something to say, but couldn't find the words. Finally, his voice broke the silence, hoarse and heavy with emotion. "I never thought anyone would be kind to me," he said, his words coming out slowly like he was testing them in the air. "Especially not a stranger. I'm not used to that. Not anymore." The weight of his words hit her like a wave. She blinked, momentarily stunned, unsure how to respond. His voice cracked slightly, betraying a depth of pain she hadn't anticipated. The young woman felt her throat tighten, her heart aching as she realized how much he had been carrying alone, how long he had been isolated from the world around him. She started, but her words faltered, unable to express the flood of emotions rushing through her. He looked down at his hands, his eyes still glistening with the unshed tears he had been holding back. "I've been through things that leave a person alone, you know? But today, you reminded me that not everyone sees me like that." The young woman's chest tightened as she realized just how deep his loneliness ran. Her simple act of kindness, just a cup of coffee, had touched something in him she hadn't expected. The isolation, the pain he had been carrying silently, had suddenly come to light, and she was left speechless, understanding more than ever the significance of this brief encounter. A week passed since that quiet morning, but the young woman couldn't shake the memory of the veteran's words. She found herself thinking about him often, about the sadness in his eyes, the way his voice cracked when he spoke of kindness. She couldn't help but wonder more about his story, what had shaped him into the man she had seen that day. On a crisp morning, the pull of curiosity became too strong to ignore. She found herself walking back into the coffee shop, the familiar bell above the door jingling as she stepped inside. Her eyes immediately scanned the room, searching for the veteran. She hadn't expected him to be there, but part of her hoped he would be, sitting in the same corner, lost in thought with his cup of coffee. But he wasn't there. The young woman felt a wave of disappointment wash over her, her heart sinking. She lingered near the counter, unsure what to do, when the barista looked up and smiled warmly at her. "You're back," the barista said. "I was hoping you'd return. We actually got something for you." The barista handed her a small envelope, the paper worn and creased as if it had been handled many times before. It was addressed simply, "To the kind woman who bought my coffee." She took it, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't know why, but a sense of anticipation filled her. As she opened the envelope, she pulled out a folded letter, the handwriting inside neat but hurried. "Dear kind stranger," the letter began, "I can't thank you enough for what you did. You gave me more than just a coffee. You gave me a reminder that there are still people in this world who care. I'm a widower. My wife passed away years ago, and my daughter, the light of my life, was taken from me in a car accident soon after. The pain of losing them never really goes away. I've spent so long alone, trying to carry the weight of that loss, that I forgot what it was like to be seen, to be remembered. Your kindness reminded me that I'm still here, still worth something, and for that, I am forever grateful. Thank you for your gift and for seeing me." The young woman's hands shook as she read the letter, her heart breaking for him. She hadn't known. How could she have? But now, in his words, she understood the depth of his loss and the profound impact her small gesture had made. She folded the letter carefully, her thoughts swirling, a new sense of connection forming between them, even though their paths may never cross again. As the young woman folded the letter, the words lingered in her mind, echoing with a weight she hadn't expected. She had never imagined that something as small as buying a cup of coffee could have such a profound impact. The letter, filled with raw emotion and quiet gratitude, made her realize just how deeply her simple act of kindness had touched the veteran. It wasn't just about the coffee, it was about seeing him, truly seeing him, when he felt invisible to the rest of the world. She sat down at a nearby table, her thoughts racing. She had only intended to offer him a moment of kindness, but in doing so, she had unknowingly helped to heal a piece of his broken heart. The connection between them, though brief and unspoken, had been deeper than she had ever imagined. But it wasn't just his life that had changed that day. It was hers as well. She felt a shift within herself, a newfound appreciation for the small moments, for the power of simply being present in someone's life. She understood now that sometimes a simple gesture, no matter how small, could have a lasting ripple effect. It could heal, it could comfort, it could remind someone that they mattered. As she walked out of the coffee shop that day, she carried the veteran's words with her, a quiet reminder that kindness could change everything, and that sometimes the smallest acts were the ones that made the biggest difference. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this video with someone who might need a little reminder of the power of kindness. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an inspiring story like this one. Thank you for watching, and remember, even the smallest act of kindness can create a lasting impact.